Some call me the sage from South Central. Others call me the czar of common sense. But you can call me Larry Elder. And you're invited to join me tonight, starting at 7, right here on AM 560, The Answer.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. Well, we were just talking about the attempts by the D.C. press corps to gin up dissension in the ranks of Trump's senior national security personnel, as Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, and his Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis earlier this week with a bombshell that Mattis supports America staying in the Iran nuclear deal, a bombshell that actually General Mattis delivered when he was confirmed as Secretary of Defense 10 months ago, so not news. But for more on these topics and other concerns, including North Korea, I know we've got our focus on Las Vegas, but of course our national security folks need to have their focus on threats, domestic and foreign. We're pleased to be joined again by our friend John Bolton, former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations. Ambassador Bolton, thanks for being with us. Appreciate it.
Well, glad to be with you this morning. Thanks for having me.
Well, first, I just want to get your take. Tillerson had felt the need to make a press statement yesterday about this report that he had contemplated leaving, and he'd used the vice president as sort of a cutout, and he had said disparaging things about Trump, all of which he denied, and he went beyond denial to kind of tout the foreign policy positions and accomplishments of the administration to this point and suggest that he is no less committed today than he was the first day that he took the reins as Secretary of State, and then the Mattis piece that I just mentioned. How did you interpret those stories?
Well, to me, the most interesting thing about the NBC story was the timing of it. I mean, the story itself says that Tillerson made the supposed comment about Trump during the summer in July, I think. So here it is, early October, and it took them this long either to get it or to decide to print it, purely by coincidence on the very day when the president's going to Las Vegas to be with the families of the victims of the tragedy out there, and leading to the Tillerson press event, which, of course, distracted from coverage of Trump's trip to Las Vegas, and I think the legitimate national interest in getting to the bottom of how that tragedy happened and what, if anything, we can do about it. So the media couldn't have waited one more day. Was somebody about to scoop them on that story or what? So a lot of this just goes into what the agenda is and of the mainstream media, and I think this is another example of it.
Well, what do you think about Senator Bob Corker? I mean, he basically told the world what he really thinks of Donald Trump, saying that there would be chaos if Mattis, Kelly, and Tillerson weren't around.
Yeah,
but we actually heard those words come from his mouth, so that's what I heard yesterday.
Yeah, no, that's pretty clear. Like a lot of us who interviewed for the job of Secretary of State, and Senator Corker was one of them. Mm-hmm. It's hard to believe that that's what he really thinks when he was so interested in the job during the transition. And I think if he's right, and some would dispute whether he is, you have to ask yourself, well, what kind of democracy do we have? You can agree or disagree with the president, but the notion that somehow his advisors are there to keep him in check, and that's their function, not let the only nationally elected figure, along with the vice president, of course, but the nationally elected figure get his policies implemented. Is that really what you want? You want the security services, as they call them in Moscow, the Siloviki, the men of power. You want them running the government? Is that really what Senator Corker wants? It's hard to believe that's what he really meant, although that's what he said.
I want to get your take on the ISIS propaganda video that was released claiming responsibility for the Las Vegas shooting. It's been discarded by law enforcement. So they've said there's no evidence that this is connected to terrorism of any sort. I mean, other than just the fact that it was an act of domestic terrorism. But no, radical Islamic terrorist organization that we're at war with, of course, is what they mean. And Graham Wood wrote in The Atlantic that made the point that ISIS has claimed credit for for terrorist acts that they were not responsible for previously. So it wouldn't necessarily be the first time they've done this, but he also wanted to exercise restraint in terms of a determination in the immediate aftermath of what happened on Sunday night into Monday morning. And just what if you believe that it's possible that ISIS could have had any role in this, or this would be related to radical Islamic terror, and if not, what it means that ISIS did attempt to take credit for something that is unrelated to their jihad.
Yeah, well, at least as of now, I'm not aware of any publicly available information that shows a link to ISIS or any international terrorist group. But I have to say, I was disturbed to hear the FBI within 12 hours of the shooting. I mean, I woke up, I suppose, like many people on Monday morning to first learn of the tragedy when I turned on the computer and saw what was coming up. But the FBI, within, I believe, 12 hours of the outbreak of the killing, had announced they had no evidence there was any connection to international terrorism. Now, I'm willing to believe that statement is true, but the impression it was designed to give, I think, was this is not a radical Islamic terrorist incident. And again, it may turn out not to be, but from all we can tell, it's not. But I don't think it's the role of the FBI to comment publicly on investigations of any kind until the investigation is concluded. The press may not like that, and some people may not like that. I want an FBI that does its job and stays out of politics. I don't like James Comey commenting on Hillary Clinton when it advantaged Hillary Clinton, when it disadvantaged Hillary Clinton. Mm-hmm. I don't think Comey should have been out in public, and I don't think they should have been out in public declaring a negative before they've even had time to really do a full-scale job of investigating.
Well, and to your,
I think,
yeah, to your point, the special agent in charge, Adam Rouse, said, a lot of these leads will go nowhere, but we have to follow them. That's going to take some time. Talking about our discretion in providing information that's provided to us in confidence and so on and so forth. Basically saying we're not going to tell you everything we know, of course, and certainly not on the timeline that you wanted. We're going to be exhaustive and there'll be some dead ends, and hopefully there'll be some fruitful paths that we take to provide that whole picture that you're talking about. So he makes that as kind of a statement of principle, but then their FBI at the same time is willing to say, but it wasn't terrorism.
Well, that's my point. I mean, proving a negative is a very hard thing to do, and they were declaring the negative before they could conceivably have exhausted even a fraction of the potential leads and sources of information. Now, whether it was ISIS or not, who knows at this point? They have claimed responsibility for terrorist acts that they were, as far as we can tell, not involved in. If this was a claim from a real ISIS spokesperson or spokesforum or whatever, when they do that, though, and they have zero basis on which to make the claim, ultimately that undercuts their credibility. Not that I'm sure they have the same value on that we do, but I don't take anything they say at face value. But it certainly was interesting that they made that claim, and especially now, if the leaks from the investigation are accurate, that the girlfriend, who says she's madly in love with the killer, also says she had absolutely no idea any of this was going on. So I don't think we're any further along today, sadly, than we were right after the incident in figuring out what motivated the killer.
Right, and that's frustrating for us, but it's really frustrating for the victims' family members who want to know why their loved one is dead. What does your gut tell you about why he did what he did?
Well, to me, it's completely incomprehensible. The idea that somehow childhood disturbances or gambling debts, I mean, it's just not. There's no linkage between the travails that every human being goes through at some point and deciding you're going to become a mass murderer. I mean, to me, it's still a complete question mark. You can discuss theories, but until there's some hard evidence, of course it's frustrating, but I don't see what it could be.
Yeah, just going back to the ISIS thing to close the loop on that, if it turns out, as suspected, that this has nothing to do with radical Islamic terrorism or ISIS, it's not ISIS related, does that say something about ISIS being in desperate straits? Does that say something about ISIS losing its grip or diminishing as a threat?
Well, I don't think we can say that it's diminishing as a threat. I mean, it's inevitably the caliphate that it established on the territory of what I think we can call the former states of Syria and Iraq. That will be conquered. We will, and our allies, which unfortunately include the Iraqi government, a wholly owned subsidiary of the Ayatollahs in Tehran. I don't think it's going to be too much longer before the caliphate ceases to exist on the territory it now holds. But already many of the ISIS leaders have exfiltrated from the caliphate. They're in Libya, they may be in Yemen, they could be in Afghanistan and Pakistan. They've gone around the world to continue ISIS's terrorist work. Now, how that will function once the caliphate itself is destroyed, we can't say, but I do think their capacity to carry out terrorist attacks may well not be diminished. Their capacity to carry out conventional warfare against the forces arrayed against them may be about to prove insufficient. But that doesn't tell you what their terrorist capabilities are.
He is former U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations, John Bolton. Ambassador Bolton, thanks as always for being with us. Appreciate it.
Well, thanks again for having me.
And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more